Good evening and welcome to the British Academy of Forensic Sciences event this evening. We are happy to be hosting Paul Dainty, who's going to talk to us about forensic currency, giving us an insight into the management of forensics in the City of London in a digital age. I'm going to hand you over to our president, Tracy Alexander, but just before then, some housekeeping. We're going to be recording this event, so we hope that that's okay with all of you. And also, we will be having a question and answer session at the end of the event after the speech, and we will be hosting those from the question and answer, the Q&A button. So if you could just post those questions there, then we can share them with the speaker, Paul Dainty, and he will be able to respond to them at the end of his presentation. I'll hand you over to Tracy Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you very much indeed, Paul, for agreeing to speak for us this evening, particularly when I suspect that there might be one other event on tonight that potentially you may have preferred to go to, but such is Paul's dedication to his chosen profession in forensics that he's here with us this evening. So I joined the city about 7 years ago and was really lucky that Paul was already in post running the Fingerprint Bureau and the Chemical Enhancement Laboratory extremely well. I was even more lucky when he agreed a short time after that to take on the challenge of running the high-tech crime unit, the digital forensics investigation part of our organisation. It's an absolutely crucial part of modern policing, and Paul has done an amazing job with the team and with the equipment and the way that he's reorganised that setup for the City of London. And it's fair to say that's had a knock-on effect in terms of how other organisations in London across the country are running the way they do digital forensic investigation. So please do put some questions in there for me to ask Paul at the end. And now I will hand you over. Paul, thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm hoping that I'm just going to be able to set up my slideshow screen share to make sure that you can all see what I'm going to be talking about this evening. So hopefully you can. So firstly, I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thank you for inviting me to provide this short presentation on the policing threats facing us today, the new dynamics of these crimes and the strategy taken within the City of London Police in combating the threats that we face in what is a highly volatile environment, and as the title would suggest, how finances drive the criminals and influence what forensics can and can't do in modern policing. So Tracy very kindly did a brief introduction, but this is me. My name's Paul Dainty. I am a forensic manager within City of London Police Forensic Services, and we sit within the Specialist Operations Directorate. I have a history and a background in conventional forensics, and I am still a practicing fingerprint expert, but I'm also the manager of the City of London Police's Digital Forensics High-Tech Crime Unit. So today I'll be presenting to you information which, if I'm being honest with you, I hope will come as no surprise to many, if not all of you. Something which in itself I hope should be reassuring to know, and that's that in some respects we're all facing the same issues and problems. So I'm going to start, hopefully, by taking you on a quick journey, not through time, but a quick journey through crime. So when I first started my journey in forensics way back in 1990, crime was very much based on opportunistic or low-level and high-volume crimes like car thefts and burglaries. There were, of course, violent crimes and robberies, but in the context of widespread existence of highly organised and coordinated organised gangs, they were very much the exception rather than the norm. So in relation to the volume crimes, we would be seeing the types of items being stolen extend to televisions, video recorders, DVD players, jewellery, cash of the like. But mobile phones were in their infancy and would only likely contain contact phone numbers, possibly some text messages, some text records, but predominantly not much more than that. In terms of cars, they could easily be stolen by breaking a window or hot wiring them, as some of those pictures would allude to. But oh, since then, how times have changed. So what we're starting to see now is whilst we still see these opportunistic thefts occurring in the city, and they tend to centre around things like pickpockets, bag or phone snatches, and we do still see some violent and sexual crimes, but the spate of shoplifting and burglaries that may occur around the City of London and the Square Mile generally seem to be at the hands of either the needy or the desperate. Almost all other crime types that you can think of are now run as either small, medium or large businesses, and they're enterprises, and they're all fueled by currency. They're fueled by money. So even down to motorcycle and bicycle thefts, which we've seen a rise in over the last few years, these are organised by gangs because they have a steady flow of high value cycles around the Square Mile, coupled with a ready outlet of established fences who are ready to pay them agreed prices and have a national distribution network behind them. Drugs are run as businesses with county lines and large scale infrastructure at their core. It's big business and it's run like one, and technology is there to help them with the organisation of their business. But even things like pickpocket teams, they now operate on an international basis. And pre-pandemics, we would see them fly from country to country to perform coordinated quick operations in prime hotspots. For the likes of the city, this would be in areas such as the St Paul's Cathedral areas, before they would move on to their next target in another country. You'll see them certainly around London, but they are more widespread. We have fake beggars now that operate in shifts with predisposed inverted commas sites or patches, and it may come as no surprise to you to know that these are run by organised groups. Now the list goes on and on with counterfeit goods, the sex trade, illegal immigration and so on. And again, the driving factor is currency. There's lots of money to be made and a thin blue line to protect the public at large and the vulnerable, both in the UK domestically and also in the overseas victims that we get involved with large-scale fraud inquiries, excuse me. So, moving a bit quickly. But by far, the biggest growth sector for crime and where the currency of crime is now surging, certainly in the UK, but nationally as well, or internationally too, is in the digital and cyber realm. So this part of my presentation is to discuss what's the new dynamic of cyber threats and cyber crimes. So firstly, I just need to make it clear that I'm not going to be talking about cyber terrorism in terms of national state activity or national state activists directly. But what I'll be talking about is threats posed by modern cyber trends. And many of these have evolved from the history of digital technological advances and modern trends in both the enterprise setups and the business architecture around them, but also about national infrastructure and the vulnerabilities that they now represent. I just want to make one thing clear, and that's that still, from UK law enforcement and City of London Police's point of view, one of the biggest endpoint vulnerabilities lies with each and every one of us. So within the last decade, the physical boundaries of both personal and business cyber and digital security has changed almost beyond recognition. As a result of technological advances, things like traditional firewall and antivirus technology is no longer seen to be the most effective security control. And with the proliferation of connectivity, mobility, data growth, each and every one of us is now seen by us as a vulnerability to be exposed by cyber criminals and organised crime groups alike. So methods and systems such as intrusion prevention systems, threat risk engines, AI behavioural analytics are considered by black hats, which we often refer to as the bad guys in hacking and cyber environments. They see these as actually some of the least effective preventive measures to malicious intrusion or their criminal activity. And it was interesting to see that in one of the most recent black hat hacker surveys, and yes, they do exist, this was some of the findings. So 73% of the active bad guys in the cyber hacking world said that firewalls and antivirus to them was almost irrelevant or obsolete. So that's almost 3/4 of them didn't see this as an issue for them. we've seen that about a third, 32, 33% have said that actually accessing privileged accounts within businesses and industry is the easiest and fastest way to get at sensitive data that puts companies and business and financial and personal data at risk. And as I mentioned, and it's backed up in the survey, some 80% of the hackers have said that individual humans, each and every one of us, are most responsible for the security breaches that the likes of the City of London police respond to and seek to investigate. So as one of, if not the largest financial centre within Europe, London attracts a high number of CEOs, high-level managers. These include systems administrators, IT management, and basically we see these people as walking around London with a cyber target on their back. So I'm often asked, is there a simple solution around training and education? And in simple terms, my answer is no. One thing that as a human risk element should come as no surprise to any of us is the number one source of cyber fatigue and cyber risk is around password management. Simple, affects us all, but it's one of the biggest areas of risk. So I'm sure the whole audience will know about the risk posed by poor password management or multi-use passwords that we use across several accounts, several platforms, easily available passwords or system credentials. We know, and we've seen within City of London Police, that low-level criminals can now access these types of details for very small amounts of money on the dark web, and it presents little effort on their part and very little risk. And just to show you the type of returns that we now see from our investigations, is that it's estimated that for around every 10 credit card or financial hijacks, and I'll describe what that means in a moment, the potential revenue to criminals for every 1 in 10 is almost £2 million. So the return for little risk should come as no surprise that the criminals see this as a very enticing area to do business in. So the point I would make about personal risk or individual liability is things like encryption, multi-level authentication in terms of access to accounts still represents one of, if not the biggest obstacle to hackers and criminals alike. Now, there are a multitude of information security measures and systems out there that can be considered, and unfortunately in the time that I've got, I really don't have the time to discuss them. But I thought I'd pick up on a few that I thought were of interest. And we've observed an increase in the organisational shifts towards things like, and this is an exhaustive list, voice authentication. So it's an alternative person-centric solution that's not so data reliant. And it was interesting to note that in a recent separate biometric conference that myself and Tracy also sat on, the Antipodes, so our New Zealand friends, anticipate that almost 70% national contribution to voice recognition as a specific national fraud prevention measure. It's quite an expanding area, quite sort of on point in terms of something that moves away from simple biometric or numbers and figures in terms of a measure that can be used. Another big area of business, I'm hoping that many of you have got them through association with products or gone out and purchased some form, and that's digital vaults. This is the use of technology to generate complex passwords and then manage them for you. The passwords that they tend to generate will be seen as gobbledygook, a whole sequence of numbers, figures in any string length, but the system can remember them and will therefore make them accessible to you at point of use. Behavioural analytics. This is something where artificial intelligence and system learning is being used to try to identify trends or activities that it learned is unnatural or inconsistent with what it expects to see. And also multi-factor authentication. Let's face it, one password is no longer enough, either in life, personal life, or business. So it has become an industry norm. But one thing I do want to pick up on, because again, it's bandied around a lot and discussed in wide circles, certainly around cyber, and that's about the use of AI and artificial intelligence and harnessing the power of technology. So a quick note on AI and system learning. From my perspective as a forensic manager, whilst it represents a kind of ecological development in the use of technology to monitor, analyse and recognise variants to either anticipated or expected behaviour, both in terms of what a system does, but also in terms of how we as humans act and integrate with technology. What I mean by that is businesses or systems knowing what you do and usually how you do it. AI can then be used to spot irregular activity or trends and either seek to arrest it or bring it to your attention, which then gets brought to our attention to look into. But, and here's the but, it's also presented an opportunity to criminals to use AI to do something that we call baseline, successful penetration techniques and vulnerabilities, and has helped facilitate what we call pivotal nature of criminals we're encountering in London in the cyber environment. So the nature of this activity allows for massive automated attacks to be instigated simultaneously, and when they're successful, the criminals pivot to whatever that vulnerability is, and then they consider when or how or if to exploit it. So the analogy I would use is pivoting in cyber terms is now like pinging something on a radar, and then everyone going to have a look and see what it's hit and if it's worth exploring or not. And that is what AI intelligence has brought to the criminal fraternity. And as with many things that we encounter in London, excluding the true terrorist and nation state activity, almost everything's financially driven. So again, talking about financial currency, forensic currency, criminal currency, financially motivated cyber threats and activity, what are we in the City of London seeing and experiencing? So you might hear these terms and not necessarily know what they are, but we're certainly still seeing efforts around cryptojacking or coin mining, the use or the need for massive amounts of computational power to try and solve mathematical problems to basically release cryptocurrency or coin, which has a shockingly high value for ultimately what it is. Well, the City of London has, like many others, expected a shift in cyberjacking or crypto mining, coin mining activity, and that tends to reflect the fluctuation around the value of the currency itself. But it may be interesting to know with the comments and the input of the likes of Elon Musk and the effect it has on the downward trend in value, it may be temporary, and we as the police, certainly within City of London Police, do think it's temporary. It tends to fluctuate like the value of the currency itself. And we've seen this trend fluctuate in response to the criminals' expected returns. So I took a look at the Simnotech threat report. Simnotech, if you don't know the company, are behind the likes of Norton, antivirus, anti-malware, and cybersecurity software. But we saw through their threat report that cryptojacking, where cyber criminals run these coin miners on victims' devices without their knowledge, where they seek to leverage the use of the CPUs from those computers, has fluctuated significantly in the last couple of years. But a shocking figure was that Simnotech alone are currently blocking around 8 million cryptojacking events per month. So whilst that dropped somewhere around 50% over the course of the last year from start to end, the City of London Police believe that while some criminals may have turned to alternative means, formjacking being the big one, we still see it as a temporary lull whilst the value of cryptocurrency itself has declined. But many cryptojacking criminals, we believe, still see this as worthy of their time, given the low risk versus high returns equation. And I personally still believe that cryptojacking has a role to play within the cybercrime landscape for the future. But another interesting fact about that was in the last national threat assessment, whilst cryptocurrency itself only accounts for a tiny amount, just 1% of criminal activity in terms of its use, the use of cryptocurrency itself currently equates for around a third of the UK money laundering activity, which is presenting us with a lot of inquiries, a lot of investigations around the use of cryptocurrency and the technological difficulties that it presents to us around criminal activity for laundering illicit gain. Financial industry is tightening up around crypto markets and cryptocurrency, and they're introducing quite robust anti-money laundering measures. But to be honest with you, the sums involved are quite staggering. So something else I mentioned, and we've seen it as a boom area over the past year, and it will come as no surprise to you the reason why, is formjacking. So formjacking is the malicious use of scripted code which is used to steal your credit card details or other payment forms or payment information from checkout pages of e-commerce sites, online businesses where you pay for goods or services. It's shocking the amount of data that's readily available on the dark web around stuff that people have produced and then sell for others to make use of as well. The dark web is currently selling formjacking script for around $40 to $50 each. So basically the criminals don't have to do a lot of work for themselves. They can buy the script that they require to try and hijack payment sites, and there's a significant yield for would-be buyers. Now, we particularly have seen a spike in activity in the UK, and we see it possibly as a result of, as I've said, a temporary hiatus in the cryptojacking activity by organised gangs. But we actually think it's probably more likely to be a sharp increase from the pandemic about the mass of people working and shopping at home as a result of the COVID situation, and therefore the opportunities for criminals to capture vulnerable victims by using quite complex but simple technology around formjacking has made it a boom area in terms of criminal activity over the last 12 months. A bit of a concern is we've also seen some noteworthy collaborations by criminal gangs over the last year. One particular one is a group of separate activists called MageCart, who are actually several groups in the UK, and they've joined together to target institutions. So not necessarily more widespread over the last year, but some of the notable ones that you may have heard of prior to that MageCart were involved with were the attacks on British Airways and Ticketmaster, which made the headlines. So I'm hoping that there'll be the type of crime that you will have seen reported, and that's the kind of crime that we're trying to investigate. And it's just a representative of the growth in what's sometimes referred to as well supply chain attacks. And these typically target small to medium retailers. That's why the bigger groups join together to try to reap rewards from bigger institutions. But the insertion of malicious code into vendors' websites or redirecting you to fake equivalents has reaped significant rewards for criminals. And it's also a more stable market. So with the value of card and payment credentials more assured or reliable than other sources such as cryptocurrency, it's no surprise that criminals have turned to them. They can be very simple and can, as I say, reap huge rewards with very little risk to the criminals. Again, another recent example, I'm hoping that none of the audience fell foul of this particular scam, but you may have heard about it, and it's the Royal Mail scam, where people were sent a fairly innocuous message saying that a delivery was being withheld as the postage wasn't paid sufficiently. Click here and you'll be taken to a very convincing page where you enter your details to release the parcel, and hey presto, the parcel will be on its way to you. Well, not quite. The only thing leaving anywhere will be more of your money before you know it. But I'm glad to say, in relation to that particular one, our dedicated card and payment crime unit recently made 8 arrests in relation to that particular scam, and the people who created and executed it, and that's progressing towards the courts, and we're hopeful of a positive outcome. So whilst these are new, sorry, go back one. The other more traditional areas of cybercrime, though, haven't gone away, and in real terms, this dynamic is nothing new to us, but it's a persistent and constant threat, both to the City of London, to the UK and global economies. And with this regard, I'm talking about things like phishing, trojans, malware, ransomware, terms that have become almost commonplace in modern life. So phishing. This continues to take place with humans being the obvious endpoint. We're the vulnerability in this. And And like I said before, we've seen a significant growth in online and mobile activity, offers a significant playing field to the criminals to engage in, and we see lots of referrals for criminal investigations in this area. But we actually think the trend has peaked and it's now a stable threat. But the difference is the criminals behind it, the demographic of the criminal has changed. Whereas historically, cybercrime and hacking, this type of crime was seen as a bit of an elite space for tech-savvy or elitist code or script writers, modern phishing exploits are available to the criminal masses either through widely available online software or through physical hands-on contact. What I mean by that is the criminals are doing lots more cold calling. It's seen as a particular exploitation of the more vulnerable victims within our society. But City of London Police, as a national lead force for fraud, see this as an area that occupies us, and it's fair to say it occupies us constantly, and it's something that I have to manage in terms of forensic response far too frequently. Ransomware and DDoS. DDoS being dedicated or direct denial of service. Big business area right now, making lots of headlines around the world. So ransomware is again one of the biggest areas and has seen almost an explosion of activity over the last few years. Seen a significant growth in mobile platforms activity over the past 12 months. And we've seen about an estimated increase of around a third on previous attacks. Globally, there's been an uptake in enterprise attacks, and enterprise attacks means attacking businesses and big businesses, and it's increased at least tenfold over the past 12 months. There have been some big instances hitting the headlines recently, such as the DarkSide's ransomware over the US oil pipeline, a recent attack on the Russian meat provider. And in these instances, millions and millions of dollars are being demanded in ransom. Now, we've had similar attacks in the UK, but we tend to suppress the coverage so as not to provoke sort of national hysteria, concern or panic over it. And it's always unfortunate from law enforcement's point of view to see any victim at the end of it. But the UK is not the number one victim in the world. The number one place for ransomware to take place is by far and away the US. It's the number one market for activity, with education, business, national infrastructure being attacked weekly, and demands, like I say, being in the size of millions of dollars. And this is just where the criminals are seizing control of something or denying the owners access or use for a service, and they will only release it on payment of a ransom. And it's pretty much always the same kind of thing. I'm hoping that if I've got time at the end of the presentation, I did a review at the weekend to see some of the figures around some of the ransoms either being paid or withheld, and I'll try or look to share those with you. So next slide, if I move along. Oops. Excuse me. So Trojans, what can I say about Trojans? Well, actually, just before I do, I'd just like to touch on maybe something that is a bit new to us and has been a bit more of a concern, is a reported surge in malware attacks using fileless malware hostility. What this actually means is it's the exploitation of using legitimate programs and processes within a system. And it's posing a real challenge for us in terms of detection and pursuit. And I would say that the estimation of reported incidents to us is that about a third of malware attacks now are looking to use legitimate program flaws to gain access to data. So we're kind of expecting or seeing this as a bit of a new norm as well, because of the availability of the techniques, and also because of the difficulty that organisations have in detecting them. And that's perhaps why this tactic's being more commonly used now. Certainly something called PowerShell seems to be an attacker's tool of choice for conducting this method. And we have seen a massive surge in the last couple of years of reported exploits. And it represents almost unprecedented access to inner cores of systems. And And so concern to us as law enforcement in the prevention of crime is the ability for a hacker to compromise not only just a single machine, but possibly an entire business, an entire enterprise, through the basic acquisition of something as simple as a single username and password, which can lay the door wide open for further harm. I mean, as traditional approaches to security are irrelevant under such circumstances because the type of activity is trusted and it's expected, unless there are solutions in place to distinguish between malicious and benign use, we think there will continue to be an avenue that criminals look to exploit. And this was a shocking figure for me. Again, in a recent threat report, it's reported that this method of attacking has seen a staggering 1,000% increase in malicious PowerShell scripts being written and blocked from 2018 onwards. So we, like many other law enforcement agencies, have seen that around probably half of the type use Office documents, Office processes, so the doc extensions, but some using Excel formats. But basically attackers are looking to use flaws in widely available tools using malicious code to gain access to your systems. And they can deliver crippling payloads to existing systems or extract data which they then use to hold to ransom for staggering amounts of money. All a bit of a concern. So Trojans, these haven't gone away. In the last year, we've seen financial Trojans, the imposition of these dark halls pieces of code. They tend to target financial hubs and centres globally, such as the City of London. They tend to be organised by the same types of gangs, and some of the biggest ones that we've seen over the year have been Ramnet, Zbot, Emetep. These are names that are going to mean nothing to you. All I would say from a forensic management point of view and law enforcement, these are the people who are behind most of the biggest elusive and costly forms of Trojan attacking businesses in the UK. So what's next? What's next for UK law enforcement and I as a manager looking to deal with forensic management of criminal investigations? Dramatic pause, it's not going to be that exciting. IoT, an acronym for the Internet of Things. So the growth in the Internet of Things is another area that we see ripe for exploitation. And we hear of and see so many attacks through vulnerabilities that's quite frightening, really, and some with sophisticated technology and some with very, very simple stuff. Almost any reputable penetration testing company could probably expose vulnerabilities in the Internet of Thing devices, and therefore criminals and activists see it as a tantalising means of access to national, corporate, as well as personal artefacts. And when you combine that with the human risk, it's clearly something that will continue to grow as a means of attack. And certainly as access and use of devices with technological advances grows, and certainly an exponential rate, we think this will be the new area of growth, attack and inroads into our lives. And we need to understand that the bots and worms in the Ethernet of Things will continue to look at the Internet of Things as an obvious infection point. And we haven't really seen much achieved to bring down the volumes. Routers being the most likely point of initial contact. But all I would say is both as individuals and organisations, you shouldn't be looking to be complacent in securing the systems that you use or the safety measures that you've got in place. We all know that devices are a potential target. And whilst I've not experienced or seen it yet, I have been reading with interest the evolution of the VPN filter as an internet and cyber threat. We see VPNs as a form of protection and a form of masking our activities, and criminals are now looking to use or exploit VPN filters to gain access to the underground of internet and cyber activity so that they can expose us all to more criminal harm. And particularly as it appears that it's a very stubborn, if not impossible, threat to remove. And I see that kind of thing as a very good example of the skills that are pitted against us as law enforcement. But again, coming back to the title of the presentation, currency of crime is loaded in favour of the criminals. So whilst they're financially driven, one thing as well that the hackers and the criminals also like to do, and to keep us on our toe, is what we call can-do attacks. And these seem to be just executed for the sheer hell of it. So I'm only just going to talk about one example, and I'm hoping that you might be able to relate it to some of your own personal experience that you might have had. And this particular can-do attack is called a bad power attack. And ultimately, it's just designed to see whether the bad guys can set your device on fire via a charger. So you might have your IT teams, or certainly within the City of London Police, we have information management support teams. And we'll offer and ask them, why can we only use the hardware that you say we can? Why can't we use our own devices? Why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot easier to gain access to it. Well, here's one of the reasons why. So we've discovered that there is a destructive attack, a can-do attack, which can be launched through smart chargers. So whilst outwardly they're indistinguishable from a traditional charger, smart chargers come with embedded permanent software called firmware, and it communicates basically with any device that it's connected to, and it negotiates with it what the maximum charging voltage it can handle. But by connecting an infected device to a charger, what the can-do attackers do is they exploit malicious code that they've put on the firmware to tell the fast charger to overload your device so that the voltage is too high. And what it does is it seeks to damage, destroy, or set fire to the components. So it will heat up, melt, or catch fire. And it was interesting to see that researchers found that 18 of 35 different fast charger models that they tested were vulnerable, and some had this malicious firmware in place. So there's smart people out there, and they are looking to use the Internet of Things against us, sometimes for money, sometimes just to prove how clever they are. Then moving on to another thing that you'll all be familiar with, I hope, and we'll hear it spoken about at length, and that's the cloud. What can I say about the cloud then? It offers so much potential. It offers so much potential to both the users and criminals alike. So as a means of data storage for business and the masses, great, but for the criminals, data theft and ransom through poor configuration, leading to theft or data leaks. It's worthy of note that usually poorly secured or configured cloud databases are seen as the most common thread for probably the most notable and public of data leaks and thefts over the last few years. It will come as no surprise that the cost in terms of financial penalties, customer confidence, reputational damage has been significant to those affected. And I think it would be fair to say that there are numerous tools available to identify poorly or misconfigured cloud resources. They're out there on the internet, and I, like many others, not just in law enforcement but in business, would advocate to any audience, and certainly when we engage with victims of attack, is to follow the security advice and guidance out there. Companies like Amazon are really good at providing advice for securing cloud storage and cloud services. If you're using Amazon Web Service, they have great information around securing the simple storage solution or simple secure storage services, basically the S3 buckets as they're called. So I would just say the cloud is ripe for attack. Keep your data safe, follow all the advice that you can be given, make sure you're using reputable companies. So coming back to the City of London Police, it may come as a surprise to some of you, and particularly if you're expecting me to tell you how to organise a strategy for a cyber investigation or that sort of stuff, but that's, for the time I've given, that's not what I'm going to talk about. What I will say about the City of London Police and our strategy is, up until yesterday, or the 28th of June, what I would say to you is that the City of London Police had taken a high-level strategic position that we have a greater degree or a greater proportional level of success by trying to prevent vulnerabilities or opportunities for crime in the cyber area. So we would be looking to give advice and guidance about how best to try and prevent it from happening than we would have in terms of the success of pursuing those who commit the criminal activity within our national jurisdiction. What I want to say is that's not to say we don't actively pursue those responsible. And the reason I make reference to yesterday is our organisation has introduced a big organisational shift where we are now going to actively be more intensive in pursuit of those committing cybercrime and this type of activity. But as a forensic manager within the City of London Police, I'm going to have to be honest with you. And the appraisal of our situation and its echoed through engagement with partner agencies, both within the UK and abroad, is that the criminals are well organised. They communicate more openly and quickly. They share or sell their expertise with impunity, and they have no ethical regard for the impact of their endeavours. Now, we as a UK law enforcement institution have limited resources, both in terms of finance and manpower, to combat the threats that we face and that we encounter all too regularly. So where I've spoken to you about forensic currency and finance driving our criminals, currency also now plays a big part in terms of UK and policing response. Many of the forensic decisions that I will have to consider and take will be based on two factors. Can I afford to do it? And equally, can I afford not to do it? That's both in terms of how much it costs in pounds and pence, but equally the impact or the effect on our investigation. There are some things that we will do regardless of the cost, but it's all too common a thread within UK law enforcement, and the City of London Police are not exempt from that in terms of we are financially accountable for the resources that we have at our disposal, and it's my job and the directors, so our esteemed chair Tracy's job, to make sure that we represent and pursue the best value of money of investment for return in terms of a criminal investigation and a positive outcome. So technological advances are exploited more readily by the criminals with the financial gains as a reward. They invest in cutting edge technology or can manufacture malicious code scripts or exploits which they can then sell to others or use themselves or distribute globally. And there's no fear for them about domestic law or international jurisdictional governance that we have to face. The actors are highly skilled at the top level, but we've seen that the tools and software are now accessible to the criminal masses without need for tech-savvy individuals, and these people have access to it within organised crime groups. The rewards are considered high in comparison to the risk of detection and prosecution, so criminal activity in relation to cyber-enabled or cyber-enacted crime is on the rise. And the digital footprint is evident in the majority of almost all law enforcement and criminal investigations. And that's certainly the case within the City of London and the UK as a whole. It's a reality we face. And quickly, I just want to say, we, the City of London Police, amongst others, have looked to introduce some other strategies to try and assist in what we do. So Secured by Design scheme. This is a scheme and it's a police initiative within the UK, which now incorporates a digital architecture of systems and infrastructure to any new business or venture that's brought to the City of London and to the UK. It offers advice and guidance, and it's offered to businesses by the London Digital Security Centre free of charge, and is part of this Secured by Design scheme. Cybergriffin. This is a prevention consultation service provided by the City of London Police, and we provide it to both assess and enhance cyber resilience to those conducting business or activities within the City of London. Another notable success for the City of London Police was the creation of the Police Intellectual Property Crime Unit. We identified a growing need for the investigation and prosecution of intellectual property crime. We've established a dedicated unit which investigates international appropriation or misuse of intellectual property. We actively pursue illegal distribution of film and media, which includes things like torrent and point-to-point distribution, illegal streaming, copyright infringement. We have a notable partnership with the Movie Picture Association of America, and have had some really good notable successes in cooperation with the likes of Sky, BT, Nintendo, people like this. I did also briefly want to touch on something that's close and passionate to the chairs and the Director of Forensic Services heart, and that's wildlife crime. Wildlife crime touches on all areas from recruitment of individuals on the ground to poach, kill, sell, but also to distribute, to make money. They use technology, they coordinate. So in 2018, Director of Forensic Services gained international agreement for City of London Police to provide a multidisciplinary forensic services service to support the international effort to disrupt the wildlife trade. Primarily that's based around the African nations, but we're also looking to follow online communication and the money so that we can identify the trade of animals or animal products. It's something we're really keen to see expand, and the cyberspace facilitates network criminal activity, and therefore it's a growing area of our law enforcement philosophy. But we also don't lose sight of the physical nature. Again, something that Tracy and I are very keen to focus on, and it's often overlooked in investigation, and that's physical attribution. It's all well and good to trace a device and know what was done with it, but that doesn't help you if you can't tell who was sitting, touching a button, typing on a keyboard, looking at a screen, deciding what to do with stuff. So we now incorporate physical attribution of devices into our strategic approaches and processes. So we consider DNA or fingerprint recovery whenever digital devices are recovered. But the other thing that I can't help but touch on as well, part of it, is I can't leave without mentioning the difficulties that law enforcement in the UK face around encryption of devices, particularly mobile phones, and also the end-to-end encryption of well-established social media applications. And I'm talking about the things like WhatsApp. With the mobility of data being at criminals' fingertips, growing complexity and sophistication of personal encryption, it represents some real challenges to law enforcement in the UK, certainly in the City of London Police. We have technology which prohibits or restricts access, and it's commonplace, and something we in the City of London Police struggle to keep pace with. Criminals are exploiting it, but the cost of the technology to break into these things for legitimate UK law enforcement investigation is one of those financial decisions that we struggle with and struggle to keep pace with. So the last thing I'm going to touch on, there are a couple of COVID scams. I'm just going to say there's been a significant rise in scams over the COVID period. Again, almost all motivated by greed, and the more money they seek, the more money they will look for. But there are technological and physical weaknesses around a lot of this. But there's also been a rise in door-to-door crime around it. But some of the things that we're seeing over the last year, phishing's increased, insurance scams have increased, the use of fake goods or the sale of fake goods such as masks and vaccines have increased, online formjacking because of the amount of time that people are spending at home using technology to browse and buy goods has increased. And it is all targeting money, but also those most vulnerable, those who are looking to get value for money out of their pounds, but also those who aren't as tech savvy and therefore represent themselves as easy victims. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm hoping I've got just enough to, I just kind of, will I have enough time? I might do. So I said before that I just want to talk about ransomware and about some of the costs involved because it's in the public interest and things that you hear about. So I'm very quickly going to just give you some idea of the level of ransoms involved, the complexity and the risk. So Baltimore County, Maryland public school attack earlier, just before Christmas, 115,000 students were prohibited from accessing remote tuition. So in terms of BAS and UK educational facilities, something that we have in common. But Baltimore County paid $8 million for the decryption code to be able to get back to business. And that emanated from a phishing attack which accessed one single reusable password. In March to May this year, the Russian meat processing company, JBS, paid $11 million to gain a decryption key to stop the ransom attackers leaking stolen data. And that was in Russia, but the attack emanated from Croatia. The Colonial Pipeline ransomware, you've heard about $4 million just to get the key back, and at least 10 times that in trying to get reputational business and the pipeline back up and running. Really recent stuff, May this year, Air India affected by a ransom attack where they leaked 4.5 million customers' details. June 2021, Fujifilm shuts down its network as a result of a ransom attack. And then my last one, a most worrying one before I do sum up, is in 2021, this year, hackers broke into the New York Metropolitan Transport Authority system with a view to trying to disrupt the entire transport network hub of New York. And given that the metropolis of London, potential for something similar is something that really concerns me. And then my very last one, and this is the staggering one. In May 28th, 2021, hackers managed to piece together from digital flashcards that were put up online as part of training material, but these are all disparate pieces of information, so not all contained in a single place, but hackers managed to piece together sensitive information about US nuclear missile bunkers in Europe. And they managed to piece together protective aircraft shelter locations, weapon storage security systems. They compromised camera positions, patrol frequencies, identifiers on badges, code words used by guards to facilitate that they were being actively threatened. All of these flashcards were up online as training material made available to those that needed to use it. The cyber world is a very dangerous place. We as a City of London Police look to protect those in the public from the effects, and we do what we can, but financial currency is at the heart of it in terms of what the criminals are looking to do and how much money we have at our disposal to try and combat it. And therein is the summary of my presentation about the kind of threats that we're currently facing and the kind of tasks that I'm having to deal with and manage on an all too frequent basis. And at this point, I'm hoping I haven't over talked for too long. I'm going to hand the chair back to Tracy or to Leslie for any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. And you think that I ought to know all of the things that you know, at least in part, but I've definitely learned something this evening. So lots to talk about in the week. But we've got some questions in the chat, and also some people with connectivity problems have sent me some questions directly. Okay. So we're going to kick off with a couple from Barbara, who says, excellent and illuminating talk, thank you. The criminal gangs that you're talking about, yeah. Do you give any credence to the idea of the Russian and Chinese government's involvement?
I did say that I don't want to talk about national state activity and national sponsored activity. I can give you one example that I spoke to. So the attack on the New York Metropolitan Transport Authority has been directly linked to Chinese sponsored activity. Don't quote me, but it is known to be a fact. So some of the gangs will be, it depends on the type of attack that we're talking about. If it's attacks on national infrastructure, there is a heightened level of potential national state sponsorship. Ransomware attacks that are looking for financial reward don't tend to be generated by national state activity, because national states aren't necessarily looking for financial recompense or reward. That tends to be in the mindset of true criminal gang activity. So I would say in terms of national sponsorship, it very much depends on the type of criminal activity and the type of focus of attack that we're dealing with. There is some going on, but obviously there is the National Cyber Threat, the National Crime Agency that will deal with those, as well as our intelligence services that will focus on that. UK law enforcement and certainly the City of London Police will tend to be targeting or dealing with what I would call sort of true criminal activity. I hope that sort of goes some way to answering the question.
Yes, thank you very much. Bob, I would also like to know if you've got a smart home. Does your fridge know when you need more milk?
I personally, as some will attest, that as a manager of digital forensics and high-tech crime, knowing what I do, I tend to steer away from too much technology. I think the more you have, the more risk there is. All I would say is try to be sensible. I don't know, most people have heard of attacks through smart TVs, the hijack of your Alexa or Google devices. The exposure is enormous. So if you have technology, there's a risk associated with it. Just use it sensibly and don't expose yourself in any way more than you absolutely need to.
Super stuff. So I've got a question from Jill, which is, are there other countries that are considered more advanced at digital forensics investigation than we are? And my tuppence worth there is just to say that I spent quite a lot of time with government agencies in New York looking at how they do it, and because their threshold for evidence levels is so different, they don't really have to prove an offence if they have somebody that they can track down and do a plea bargain on. 80 to 90% of the US prosecutions are plea bargained with no actual evidence investigated by the police at all, which even when I say it out loud, I find it difficult to believe. But they don't test for fingerprints, they don't test for DNA, and if they can get away with it, they don't bother to look at the digital devices either. So I can't, in all honesty, say that I think that the states do it better. Do you know, Paul, of anywhere else that does it better than us, differently to us?
All I would say is certainly in terms of the US, in terms of their exposure to risk, they're more exposed, certainly around national infrastructure and bigger business. Also, just because their economy pumps more into the development of technology and the research areas, and therefore a lot of the software development tends to emanate from them just because they have the resources to put into it to reap the rewards. So I would say certainly a lot of the technological solutions that we're using have emanated from the US, but I can't also leave out our friends in Israel, who also have produced some significant technological advances, certainly around mobile platforms, mobile decryption. They have invested in technology and technicians, which the rest of certainly UK and other Western nations reap the benefit from, bless you.
Thank you.
In terms of commenting on the capabilities of Eastern or Far Eastern nations, I'm not in a position to comment. Tracy, it's not really something that they tend to share. But the APAC, I presented at the APAC conference, so the Asian Pacific areas, they're certainly keen to develop their capabilities, but I see them behind Western nations in terms of our current capability.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. We're bang on the hour, so unfortunately we can't put any more questions to you. Jill, I can answer that question about mobile phone encryption. It's a miracle, I know, but please do send any questions that you have in. Leslie will collate them if we haven't had a chance to get to yours this evening for Paul to answer it live. I'm sure he'll be prepared to at a later date. So there's lots and lots of messages here, Paul, that are saying thank you for a fascinating talk, really excellent, really informative. So thank you from me also. Very, very grateful that you gave up this evening in particular to do it. How could we have known? So thank you all very much.
All I can say is I've heard some cheering through my wall because I have some rather passionate footballing neighbours. I'm hoping and I'm optimistic that that's good news. So but no, it's a pleasure, and I hope people enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you very much again, and thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you at the next one, which is coming up. Have a look on our website, but we've got the Ballon Poisoner in just a couple of weeks from now. That promises to be very interesting, and you will receive a feedback survey at the end of this presentation. Please do give us your feedback, because obviously that's the way that we can improve. It was great to see so many of you here today when there was something else going on. So a testament, Paul, to how highly regarded you are. My thanks again, and a good night to all of you.
Okay, thank you.